had never been or been invited, and so I thought, well, you had to be a certain, certain level, a certain tier of author before you could debut at Poison Pen.
So
And,
not true. So not
so
true.
she was driving me home, and I had never been here yet. She was like, I think it was like, might have been one of the first Thriller Fest, maybe, I can't remember what it was. But you were driving me home, and you're like, Jim, why haven't you ever signed at my store? And I was like, I'm not worthy. What are you talking
I almost
about?
steered us off the road, when I recovered. I mean, it is interesting, the balance between our requesting authors, your requesting authors, publishers thinking we should do things. Thank you. I'll get started here. Just finishing for those who are tuning in. 1 second. But the thing that we have tried to do for 32 years is to welcome all new authors. That's the one thing that we really make a point of, is chasing down debut authors. And a lot of bookstores don't do that because there's not much money in it as a general rule. But that's why you see people like Mark Rainey, whose first book was a $7.99 paperback, and he was here, and so forth. And Jim actually started out with some paperbacks.
Yeah,
right?
first 3 books were paperbacks.
Right. Anyway, good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. If I had realized that April 18th was tax day, I just can't believe how many people apparently last minute pay their taxes. But anyway, for those of you who are here, I'm going to assume you're either risking penalty and interest or you've already done it. And for those of you,
an extension.
or an extension. And for those of you watching, obviously you can watch it at any time, or you can keep filling out your form while you're attending it. So tonight, we're so pleased to see Jim Rollins back and with another Sigma Force book, and it's been a long time, hasn't it?
2 years since his last Sigma.
Right. And in January of this year, Jim reverted to his original science fiction fantasy persona and wrote a book called The Starless Crown, which you might have seen up there in the front. And it was wonderful to get acquainted with that side of Jim. Although, that Sigma Force often has some sort of supernatural, fanciful,
Fantastical element to them.
Fantastical and scientific element in it. So while we've got a couple more people coming in, why don't you talk for a moment about The Starless Crown, and then we'll segue smoothly into Kingdom of Bones.
I had this idea for doing a fantasy, returning to my roots, because when I first was trying to get published, I wrote what I thought was a science fiction novel with telepathic marsupial creatures that lived underneath Antarctica. So clearly science fiction. So my editor said, no, this is not a science fiction because you set it in modern times. Therefore, it can't be science fiction. It must be a thriller. I'm like, whatever. You want to buy it? It's yours. Call it whatever you want, ma'am. Well, at the same time, because I had so many rejections, and they generally were not kind rejections. They were, usually you get form rejection letters. Subterranean was rejected by 49 different agents. There was a 50th agent that saw something. And I've explained this before, the rejections were not necessarily kind. You get the form rejection letter. Some editor might send you a little personal note at the back, and one editor did, kind enough to give me a little pat on the back, just 3 words of encouragement. This is unpublishable. So, I appreciated the extra effort to not only reject me, but kick me in the nuts besides. So that was, we appreciate that. But, so I became convinced. It takes a while to get 49 different rejections. So I thought, well, maybe I'm not the science fiction / thriller writer. I'll jump to another genre I like to read. Started working in fantasy. And there's a long story on how that got published with Terry Brooks and assaulting Opie from, I'm not going to go into it. It's a way too long story. You want to hear how I assaulted Ron Howard? You ever heard him tell you that one? Maybe because we haven't actually done a fantasy here. That's right. So you haven't heard that story. So again, unpublished. Struggling to get published, was working on this fantasy while collecting rejections for Subterranean. About halfway through my fantasy novel, and I get that 50th agent calls me and says, hey, Jim, I liked your book that you sent me. I think I can publish it. And I'm thinking she's crazy because A, this is unpublishable. I have verifiable New York expertise proving that she's insane. But I said, whatever, go for it. She goes, but I need to know, what are you working on now? It's very important that you have another book in the pipeline because it will help me sell the book. So what are you working on now? So I'm really excited, about halfway through the first book in the fantasy series. And she goes, ugh. She made that noise, ugh. I don't like fantasy. I don't know any of the fantasy editors or publishers. Stop writing that. Write me another thriller.
Oh.
Now I'm thinking, I'm halfway done this book. It's hard to get rid of that, and I can't stop. The train tracks have been laid. The locomotive is barreling down that path. I can't just stop. So I said, yes, I'll stop. It was a lie. I'm a fiction writer, but I'm not going to tell the 50th agent who is agreeing to represent this book anything except yes. And I was assured at this point that she was never going to publish the book anyway, so no skin off my nose or whatever. So she began submitting it. I continued to write my fantasy. I'd already also, the impetus for not stopping was I had submitted a part of that fantasy novel to a contest at a writing conference. It was the Maui Writers Conference. It was my very first writers conference I was going to go to. I was smart enough to pick the Maui Writers Conference if you're going to go to a writers conference. And it was going to be occurring at the end of summer. I had submitted my first couple chapters in the synopsis of that book to the contest at the beginning of summer. Shortly after that, I got that call from that agent. So I thought, if nothing else, I'm going to finish this book over the summer and see what success. My first agent's name was Pesha. So Pesha said, started collecting rejection letters also for Subterranean. And I'm like, proved it. There you go. See, it's unpublishable. Not exactly the sentiment for an author. Like, oh, ha ha, I'm unpublishable. I knew it. So the months go on. Summer rolls around. I have finished the fantasy novel. I go to the conference. And it was the second year the conference was in existence. So they didn't have all the bugs worked out of their system. It's a big conference. They had 600 attendees, plus all the panelists and speakers. And the first night, they had a meet and greet tea, where the participants can mingle and rub elbows with the panelists and speakers. And again, I'm a little nervous, so I walk into this ballroom. They required gentlemen to wear jackets because it's a literary event. So you had to look professional. If you had patches right here, you got extra bonus points. And they said you could wear a Hawaiian shirt underneath it, but you had to wear the jacket. Keep up Maui at the end of summer. It's hot, it's humid, it's a crowded ballroom full of 600 people. I'm literally sweating through my jacket at this point. Plus, I don't know how to act. It's my first writers' conference. I don't know what proper etiquette is in this environment. And I swear, as soon as I walk through the ballroom door, everybody closes into these little cliques and begin talking amongst themselves. And I'm not very good at breaking into conversation. You sidle up to a group and go, I like dogs, and hope for the best. I just don't know what to do. So I get more and more nervous, sort of circling through here. And I look across this crowded ballroom, and I see somebody I recognize from Sacramento. Now, it's not a close friend, but it's a friend of a friend, which, trust me, at that point, that is enough of a connection. We're going to be glommed at the hip for the rest of this conference. So I hurry up to him, and I grab him on the shoulder, and I go, what are you doing here? I can't believe you're here. He turns around, and it's Ron Howard. It's Opie. It's the director. Now, he was wearing, if you look at most times, Ron Howard's wearing a cap because he's quite bald. So he wasn't wearing his cap. So he looked a little bit like my friend from Sacramento, but he was not. So he turns to me and goes, oh, well, sorry, I was invited. I'm like, okay, just checking. Making sure you weren't party crashing. So I turn tail and run. Now I'm circulating through this conference, and I'm even more nervous. Now I have to worry not only about etiquette, but also Ron Howard security. And across the crowded ballroom, I recognize somebody else. And so I approached this gentleman. This time I stalked him, circled him a couple times, and this time checked the name tag. And it was Terry Brooks. Terry Brooks is the international best-selling fantasy author of the Shannara series. I pronounce it Shannara. He pronounces it different. He's wrong. It's Shannara. And I said, Mr. Brooks, I've read the Shannara series, which is how you should pronounce it. Big fan. Just can't believe I get to meet you. And he looks at my name tag and goes, yeah, I'm a fan of yours too. I thought, Terry Brooks is an asshole. Who knew? I've learned something at this conference already. And he goes, no, I recognize your weird last name, because it was weird. The Rollins is not my real name. And he goes, I was one of the judges for this year's contest, and I read your fantasy story, and I invited my editor to come down and meet you, specifically based upon the fantasy submission. So I was offered a 3-book fantasy deal from Terry Brooks' editor. So of course, I quickly, once I got back to the hotel room, I called my agent, Pesha. Pesha, I think I sold my fantasy series, but I might need somebody like to negotiate the contract for me. And she goes, "Oh, great! I love fantasy." I like that 15% to engender a great deal of love. And she goes, "Oh, by the way, I also have 2 publishing houses currently competing for Subterranean." So I went from unpublished to published within 1 week. All of a sudden, I went from Dr. Jim the veterinarian to Dr. Jim the veterinarian, James Rollins the thriller writer, and James Clemens the fantasy writer. Life got a little bit schizophrenic there for a while. So for the first decade of my career, I was writing a fantasy book and a thriller book every year under the 2 different pen names. But James Rollins became a little more popular. James Clemens sort of faded into the woodwork a little bit. But I never quite gave up my love of the genre. And so I had this idea for setting a fantasy on a tidally locked planet. What a tidally locked planet is, a planet that circles its sun with one side forever facing the sun, one side forever in darkness. It's what our moon does. Our moon is a tidally locked satellite around our planet. So there are planets. The reason I got the idea from it, I was reading an article about tidally locked planets in an astronomy magazine. I thought, that's cool. Don't know what to do with it. And I think, well, that might be a cool place to set a fantasy. So I started questioning it. So I asked an astronomer, is it possible that life could be on a tidally locked planet? He said, yes, because of the thermodynamics, there's probably going to be some cycling of air from the cold side to the hot side and vice versa. And so there probably is a habitable clime and the equator between the 2 extrees, between the hot and the cold. There's going to be a temperate area. Well, perfect. And then I got to think, what would life look like there? And then I consulted some xenobiologists and evolutionary biologists to try to figure out how would life evolve in such extremes. So that began snowballing. So I had this idea. I pitched this idea to my editor 7 years ago. I actually still have the email that I originally had this idea from. And but it sat on the back burner, but kept snowballing. I kept adding maps and drawings. If you read Starless Crown, there's like little drawings in there. My drawings look like, this is a cat, just stick figure with claws. And so I gave it to the graphic artist who did beautiful art in this book, and she made it beautiful. But eventually, just built, snowball, got louder and louder in my head. It was just hard to ignore. So I decided to go ahead and tackle that first book in the new fantasy series. So that's how Starless Crown came about. Very long answer. And our time is up.
That's right. No time for Sigma Force. Well, you can see that the Maui conference set him up for rejection by the Poison Pen, right?
Yes,
but in any case,
very low esteem at that point.
In any case, here we are. And I thought one of the things that we might talk about, because one feature of the Sigma Force books that has always appealed to me are the landscapes of the books. Do you remember the last one? We did Greenland and all kinds of cool stuff. I have been through a serious diet by Jim so he could go caving in order to, which book was that? It was a while back.
So probably 4 or 5 books ago, probably. I don't remember which one it was.
Right, but anyway, Jim immerses himself in the landscape that he's going to write. Well, there's more than one in almost every one of the Sigma Force, but there's kind of a key landscape. But in this book, we are really centered on Africa. And I don't know about you, but I know less about Central Africa than other parts of the world. So I don't know why, but just turned out that way. So I learned a lot in reading it, and I thought we might talk a little bit about setting it up, because there's history, there's mythology, and there's a really brutal colonial experience for Central Africa, particularly. I said to Jim at dinner last night, I never thought of Belgium as brutal a colonial power as it turned out to be. They came late to the game, and for some reason or other, their relationship with the Congo was just horrible.
Yeah, I mean, basically, when I'm constructing a novel, I'm looking for that historical mystery. I'm looking for that science that makes me go, what if? And I'm also looking for cool locations, and I collect those tidbits all around. And so it started out because back about a decade ago, I went to Tanzania, and they were rehabilitating Western mountain gorillas, and so I got a chance to go ahead and visit the facility, and that became Baco from the Bone Labyrinth, was based upon that encounter. But I knew I always wanted to go back and do what I would consider to be a big jungle epic. How many people read Amazonia? So that's somewhat of a big jungle epic, but in the Brazilian rainforest. I sort of my elevator pitch for this is if you took Sigma Force, threw in the middle of Amazonia, and it required Tucker and Kane to rescue them. That's this book. But doing my research for the location, the history, I kept in my little Congo folder. I kept adding things to it, and one of the things initially was the horribleness of the colonial period. Yeah. And when King Leopold II was basically bought in parcel the entire Congo region, and to collect rubber, he began just a pogrom of brutality. 10 million Congolese would die over a 10-year period because of his brutality. And it was hidden. The atrocities went unreported for a long period of time. A lot of people attribute Conrad for writing The Heart of Darkness as exposing what was going into the Congo. And that's not really true. The true person that exposed the atrocities in the Congo was a black Presbyterian minister, a reverend actually. He had gone to the Congo to start a mission, armed only with his faith and a Kodak box camera. He risked his life and the success of his mission to expose atrocities. And the pictures are worth 1,000 words, and that's what really was the first breaking point, is his taking pictures of what was going on. That being printed in papers in America is what then raised awareness, raised the world against the Belgian colonialists, and so that's what finally changed the entire area. So I was fascinated by how this one figure could change history like that. And then, so that was in that folder, but also in the folder was the mythology. I'm always looking for the interesting stories, and there's a story that occurs in Central Africa about Prester John. Anybody familiar with Prester John? Prester John was a black Christian king who ruled over a vast empire in Central Africa. Most people believe he ruled Ethiopia. And for centuries, the legend of Prester John existed, proliferated, and grew. His legend was tied to a kingdom of astronomical wealth. It's tied to the Ark of the Covenant. It's tied to a fountain of youth, to the King Solomon's mine. And emissaries from Europe, from popes even, sent people to try to make contact with Prester John. And most of them vanished into the jungle, were never seen again. A few Portuguese emissaries came back and said, yes, we found this kingdom. They brought gold to prove it. So the mythology, this belief in Prester John, continued for centuries. But then over time, no one could find him. There was some other kingdom they thought might be Prester John's kingdom, but it wasn't. So today most historians believe that Prester John is just mythological. But I'm always the fiction writer that I am. What's the kernel of truth behind a story that persisted for centuries? There must be something that generated that. What did those Portuguese emissaries come back with? And what stories were they telling? Were they just fibbing? But then why were they bringing gold? Why would they give their kings gold and create the story? So there seems to have had to be a basis of truth. So Kingdom of Bones is the mythological Prester John's kingdom that eventually Sigma Force has to find to expose what's going on in the present day, which is a virus that has gotten loose in the jungle doing horrible things.
So it's important to recognize that Ethiopia was much larger than it is today. It embraced a lot of Central Africa.
Right.
And interestingly, last week, on a totally unrelated, because if you're habitués of the Poison Pen, we digress quite often when we're talking. John Sanford was here with his new book. And John, I was telling Jim last night, for many years supported an archaeological dig in Israel and did the photographing. That was for 20 years, that was his project. And out of that, what he said was that there is independent proof outside the Bible about King David, and David had some sort of a kingdom. Although, if you look at Israel, it's a very small country. Think of it this way: you can fit the entire British Isle into Arizona, so you can fit Israel into a small part of Minnesota. So what might have seemed like a kingdom could, in fact, have been more like a town. It didn't have, but the interesting part is there is absolutely no independent evidence, by which you mean monuments or other documents or anything else, that King Solomon ever existed. There's none. But there is a whole mythology about King Solomon's mines in Africa.
Yep.
And, whether Prester John, in fact, might be linked or mistaken for King Solomon. Another thought is that Solomon was really an Egyptian pharaoh they kind of borrowed, which would make some sort of sense. But Africa was so impenetrable that much of that could arise. Did any of you see, probably you're not old enough except for me, the movie King Solomon's Mines? Do you remember? I mean, it was Stuart Granger, Deborah Carr.
Of course.
I remember because Deborah Carr had, like a Beverly Hills haircut in the middle of Africa halfway through when her hair got in her way. I mean, it was Hollywood, right? But it's a real swashbuckler of a movie and fun, but there was serious gold that was taken out. So did you find when you were looking at all this some sort of evidence of something like King Solomon's mines?
Yeah, I mean, there is like where they believe King Solomon's mine, there actually is current mines, and it's a very rich gold source. So the fact that there is actually a lot of gold in Central Africa, and that mythology preceded the discovery by modern day mining companies of gold in that area, suggests that, why did they believe gold was there when no one was mining gold was there? So to me, that suggests there was some historical precedence for knowing there was vast deposits of gold in Central Africa. So how did they know that before the mining companies got in there?
So the Portuguese might indeed not have been fibbing. They might have found the gold and just kind of draped it around with the idea of Prester John. So Kingdom of Bones in the book is what it...
It's my version of the remnants left over from Prester John's kingdom, but I don't want to say anything more than that.
It's not a Yellowstone moment here?
No.
Any of you were here for, I ruined the entire point of one of Jim's books. Never gotten over it, right? So a Yellowstone moment is one I'm trying not to recreate. Jim was very nice about it, although I knew he wanted to kill me right on the spot.
Yeah, I think I went several shades paler.
It's like, oh well.
That's the ending of the book.
Right.
Surprise. No one has to buy it now.
So who of the Sigma Force team is engaged in this book?
Pretty much everybody. I don't want to disappoint too many. Seishan is not in this book. And there's a
horrible silence when you said that.
Exactly. Seishan is not, I mean, she's mentioned, but she's off stage at this one. But Tucker and Kane come back on stage, so they're...
Which is why you have a dog.
The next book that I'm writing right now is all Seishan. And there's a reason why I have to push her off to the side a little bit for what's going to happen in this next book. I'm not going to tell you what that is. Well, one of the reasons why this book, by the way, it took 2 years. This book's been finished I finished this book in June of 2020. So it's been sitting on the shelf for a long time. And the reason why is because you're wearing a mask. Is that, I pitched this idea to my house in late 2019, because I had pulled an article out of New Scientist magazine in early 2019. You can look this up. There's the article in New Scientist in 2019 that's when is the next global pandemic due? So I'm thinking, and I'm reading this, who knows? I already done pandemic novels, The Sixth Extinction, Seventh Plague. But I was interested because in that article they talk about virus hunters. These scientists that would go out into the field and sample different animals out there and try to find out what the next pandemic pathogen was going to come from and try to stem off that next global pandemic. And what was interesting for me personally was that a lot of the virus hunters were veterinarians. There were wildlife veterinarians that were out there because we know how to sample and draw blood. And so there were a lot of them were, again, me being a veterinarian, I was very intrigued by that. So I thought, well, I'm going to build a story around a virus hunter. And so I began building the story around that. And late now, 2019, I had the story laid out, was working on the opening chapters, told Lisa, my editor, this is what I want to do. And she's cool, run with it. And then, of course, a couple months later, something happened. And, early March 2020, I'm almost on the book. And my editor's like, did any of the virologists you were speaking to in 2019, did they warn you what was about to happen? And I said, no, they should have. But what they told me was a lot scarier. And trust me, it's not good for your health to be in the opening months of a pandemic while you have an ear of a virologist, because they were panicked. And if they're panicked, this author is really panicked because they were concerned that this they were looking at the genetic structure of COVID. They're worried that this could be the boogeyman of the virology world. Is it's a disease they call simply disease X. It's that pathogen that spreads rapidly, mutates fast, and has no cure. So they were concerned that the coronavirus could very well be. It's fitting all those criteria from a genetic standpoint, and they were concerned this could be an absolute disaster. And so one here on the media were saying, calm down, calm down, calm down, calm down. Virologists, run for the hills, bury yourself in a mine. And I'm like, what should I do? What do I even do? And so I was about 3/4 of the way down the book, and I was debating at this point whether I should, because this was the last book, whatever the book was that I wrote, the last one.
I'll look it up for you. How's that?
The Last Odyssey.
Right.
The Last Odyssey came just a few months into the pandemic, whenever all the bookstores closed down. Luckily, Barbara was kind enough to let me fly in there and sign a.
We never did close down. We did curbside pickup, but we have been actually streaming our events since 1995. Our very first Zoom, only it was not Zoom in those days, was with P.D. James in 1995. And so,
wow.
We've done this all this time. So the pandemic just pushed more. You guys think this is the bookstore, but actually it's the rest of the building. This is just the little part of the store. It's the whole backroom operation back there. Jim has actually signed 800 books today and yesterday, and they're almost all gone. So it's not you guys that, we're thrilled to see you, but obviously you're not buying 800 books. But mostly.
You're required now. How many people are here?
Yeah.
300 copies for you, 300 copies for you.
But there's a reason. There's
go.
a reason he's here first. And do you have your insert? Could you show it to me or hand it to me for a moment? Thank you very much.
Well, let's have so again, I talked about editors. I didn't know whether I should stop writing this novel because I thought, is it appropriate to write a popcorn entertainment novel? Is it disrespectful to the people, Kelly, a nurse working in a hospital,
right.
Is disrespectful to the people that are suffering to write this popcorn entertainment, type of novel? But I knew that what I was hearing from the virologists, I thought was important because they were telling me things that I wasn't hearing in the news. They were telling me things of what's going on with the current pandemic, but also what might be coming next. So I thought these are some cool stuff that I think people should know about. So I thought I'm going to continue. Plus, again, 3/4 of the way through, not stopping.
Well, yeah, there's a lot to be said for that. And, I think it would have been harder to have done this book last year when there were so many more unknowns. Yeah. But now that we see that if there's not a cure, there is at least something that we can do. I wanted to show you, you should have, every one of you in your book, this beautiful insert that Jim's publisher made. And, I love the embossing, I love the glitter. And you can see the bats, because bats, as we now know, almost all of us, are critical to what's happened with COVID. And a big question is what can jump from animals to humans? And we don't fully know the answer to it, but if you think back to the bubonic plague, what was that about? That was that pest that jumped from rats to humans and was brought by ships. In the same way the airplane travel today has the same effect. I think the first place in Europe that was affected was Genoa, when a ship came in, if I have that right, with rats that were affected with, what's it called? Pestis something or other.
Plague, yeah.
Yeah. So I think this insert is just gorgeous and very thoughtful of his publisher. Thank you, sir, to do that for us. But yeah, I think that we should be educated. You're writing entertainment.
Yeah, in the book you're going to find out, why bats are such vectors for viruses. Why do virus hunters sort of concentrate on the bats for sampling? So there's a lot of cool stuff that I discovered from talking to the virologists, talking to some of the virus hunters that would speak to me. So the book got a little bit delayed, both because I had to keep tweaking this novel. So I was almost done, but as the pandemic was unfolding, I had to keep changing aspects of the story. Because at the point, COVID was not in the first version of the book. 3/4 of the book, COVID was not mentioned. Well, it's hard to come out with a book about viruses without COVID being mentioned. So I had to tweak it as though COVID was, a reality, because it was going to come out, I thought, amidst the pandemic. And then it was supposed to come out last summer, and then there was a variant outbreak, as you all know, and so things began to close down, and my publishing house was like, we don't want to have another situation like we ran into with Last Odyssey, where everything closed down again. let's push it off to December, because clearly COVID will be over by December. So December comes around, then it's Omicron. It says, Jim, let's just move it over to April. Surely it will be over then. So I'm hoping, I think I'm cursing this whole pandemic, by the way, is that as soon as Jim's publication date is picked, the virus is going, time to mutate. We have to ruin Jim's career. So hence a little bit of a delay. But it did allow me the extra time to write The Starless Crown. So
It's a big book because he had extra time, right? So what is the difference between virus and bacteria? Mike,
it's mostly size. I mean, the viruses are weird. Bacteria we understand. Bacteria are one-celled organisms. We understand the nucleus, the DNA. They feed on things. They multiply just like any other animal. They're basically like a tiny, tiny little animal. Virus are weird. They have, a lot of scientists don't even, virologists will debate whether a virus is a living creature or not, because it can't survive on its own. It can't multiply on its own. So there's some debate amongst virologists from an esoteric standpoint whether they should be even considered living. And viruses are very small. The rabies virus has 5 genes. The flu virus has 7 genes. HIV has, I think, 6 genes. So very tiny compared to bacteria that will have 3, 4, 5,000 genes. So in this book, we talk about giant viruses. I don't think I'm ruining anything by saying that it covers giant viruses. Giant viruses were newly discovered. They're viruses that have 2,500 genes. But what's weird about the giant viruses that were sort of first identified in 1992 is that most of the genes in giant viruses are unknown. Geneticists don't know what these genes do, what their function is. It's a total mystery. There's one virus called the Pandora virus, or the Yara virus, where all 2,500 of its genes are alien. They don't know what any of those genes do. There was another giant virus that was isolated from Siberian permafrost that was thawed and revived after 30,000 years in hibernation. So that's how weird giant viruses are. So there's a lot of weird virus stuff that you're going to find in this book. So viruses are the most plentiful form of life. I love this quote from one virologist. He told me that viruses are 1,000,000-fold more plentiful than all the stars in the universe. That every square yard of Earth every day gets bombarded from just the air with 33 million viral particles every single day, every square yard of the planet. So if something's going to challenge the human race, little tiny bugs.
So Sigma, which normally has a more concrete, more physical enemy, while it has some in this book, it's going up against virus and against nature kind of coming after you is an interesting variation on the more normal, armies of bad guys or demented scientists.
Well, there's bad guys in this. There
are.
There's an Elon Musk-like Belgium that believes that he wants to be the next King Leopold II and restart sort of a new era of colonization. He thinks he's going to help bring a new era to the Congo, but really he just wants to do it for his own personal gain. It's going to probably be just as brutalizing as King Leopold II.
If you'd really been contemporary, you could have given him Twitter.
I could have.
A scary thought. Right. So anyway, who in Sigma Force? We know that Saishan is not in here. We
exactly.
digressed.
Everybody else is. I mean, Kowalski, I don't want to ruin anything, but who's in some dire straits at the end of the last book. Tucker and Kane are in this book. Everybody knows who Tucker and Kane are, right? The Army Ranger and his military war dog. They're a great deal of fun to write. I reintroduced them in a short story because I wanted to remind readers about it, because I knew they're going to appear in this book, so I wanted to sort of refresh people about Tucker and Kane. And just be prepared is all I'm going to say. Many people cry at the end of this novel. Oh, no. So just be... No, it's not ominous. I got already some hate mail. There was kind hate mail, I should say.
Don't panic. No author seriously kills off, important characters, but there are.
I don't know. I'm a veterinarian. I have a license to kill.
Right. So anyway, Do you have a brief plot synopsis that you want to share?
Sure. So I gave you sort of the elevator pitch. Basically, it starts this big jungle epic. It starts when there's all hell breaks loose at a UN relief camp deep in the heart of the Congo, and men, women, and children are found to be in this dull, catatonic state, whereas the environment around them is ramped up. It's more predatory, more dangerous. It's evolving at an exponential rate, and it's not just the one village. It's spreading across Africa, threatening the rest of the globe. It's up for Sigma Force then to get in there and figure out what's going on and uncover a secret that's buried at the heart of the continent, tied to a cursed location known as the Kingdom of Bones. That's it.
There we go.
In a nutshell.
Right. So Sigma Force is an interesting operation, right? Headquartered in Washington underneath the Smithsonian. Are they under the Red Castle? I'm trying to remember where.
Yeah, it's under the Smithsonian
It is under
Castle. Yep.
the Red Castle.
Yep.
Right. Which is an amazing institution.
Which I visited, many times. And
Me too.
I keep wandering around there, and I sort of laid out where the door is, and so I go past that door a few times, and listen. Surely somebody thinks Sigma Force is a good idea. Surely somebody's, this is a good idea. Let's do that.
It is a good idea.
So one time I'm going to lean the door, and the door's going to open, and it's like.
We could use Sigma Force right now, right, in the Ukraine, or various people who've been, Sigma Force is fun, but there are several authors who have these kind of off-the-books ops and so forth. And I wish, like the Marvel comics, we could get them all together and send them to Kiev.
Well, I'm sure we'll combine some at some point. I mean, Steve and I was in conversation with Steve earlier today online, and the question always comes up, is Steve and I ever going to work on a novel together? Because we did
Steve Berry, you mean?
Steve Berry, sorry, yeah,
Yeah.
Steve Berry. My nemesis. Good friend. We're going to Disney World.
President of Poland.
That is true.
Absolutely
Made me the president
true.
of Poland, and so I've had his characters mentioned in my book. He's mentioned my characters in Marvel. So for a while, everybody thought we were the same person. Because they thought this was a secret nod for the knowledgeable reader out there that we were winking to say Steve Berry and James Rollins are one and the same person. So eventually we had to go on tour together to prove that we were not the same person. So we did a short story together as a fundraiser for ITW, Devil's Bone, where Cotton and Gray worked together. So eventually we'd like to do more. The problem is that he's headed for a different publishing house than I am, and so the question would be a large literary war in New York City for who would actually be able to publish that. So maybe one of these days.
I'm sure we'll work it out. Speaking of Steve Berry, he will be here to launch his book on June 7th. And it is not a Cotton Malone. It is, Jim knows about it.
It's Omega Factor is the name of the title. Good title. Hate him. I should have thought of that. And it's featuring a new character, Nick, who's a UNESCO investigator. And he's searching into one of the most vilified and most mysterious art known as I can't remember now, just drew a blank on the name of it. Anyways, it's a big adventure at the beginning of Catholicism. He won't tell me the end of it. I tried to. He promised me a copy. Anyways,
I have one at home.
Oh, you do?
I do.
Why didn't he send me one? I said
Good
in
thing
Kingdom
I
of
didn't let him
Bones.
loose in my office last night, or he probably would have vanished, right? There we go. Right, so you've always been hands-on about going to places that you write about. And
Yes.
it's one reason they are so vibrant and so interesting in your books. And obviously you haven't been able to travel
I would
other
like,
than to
I was
Scottsdale for
hoping
the
to be able
last
to,
2 years.
Again, I pitched this in 2019. I was hoping to get to the Congo, another excuse to write off a trip to Africa. But then, of course, COVID came, and that wasn't going to happen.
So
good to go.
in the book that you are now going to be writing about Sigma Force, are you going to be able to travel and go some
I hope so.
cool location?
Next book takes place in Australia, which of course is very locked down right now. So I don't know when I'll be able to travel to Australia. The next book deals with Australian colonial history, and deals with Aboriginal mythology, and deals with a treasure hunt for an artifact that might prove that we are not alone in the universe. So that's coming up next.
Boy, Australia really is locked down. The U.S. Postal Service will not ship packages to Australia. We have had them backed up in the back. I know. I'm not sure if that's Louis DeJoy or whether it's Australia or what it is. But, there have been a lot of very strange things that have happened during the pandemic. But are you going to segue over to Tasmania, or are you just going to stick to Australia?
Just Australia.
But Tasmania is pretty cool, so maybe another time.
Maybe another time, but it's Australia and Southeast Asia, the whole area. It deals with like the tsunami that occurred out there, deals with volcanic eruptions, deals with the strange, I don't know if I should be telling you this yet. Stuff happens.
Stuff happens, right? And Indonesia, certainly, you know, in the Ring of Fire in the Pacific, Indonesia's had all kinds of volcanic activity.
So volcanic activity in that area is very important.
Very.
Of course, you know, as you know, where we left Seishan, she was in, you know, Hong Kong taking her son to visit her mother. So, you know, she's about to find out she shouldn't have done that.
So we'll see one sooner than 2 years.
Yes, I hope so, barring any more plagues. So no more plagues. No one sneeze on anybody else.
And we'll see how it goes. It's really nice to be able to have all of you back at the store. You know,
It is great to be able to go out and about.
We've really enjoyed. I think we've done 739 Zoom events or something in the last. Some days we do 2 or 3 in a row, and it's given us a chance to do things like tomorrow night. David Baldacci and Don Winslow would have been nearly impossible logistically to bring them here together. Or the First Lady of Iceland. I really enjoyed doing her books. So for those who've been watching them, there's an opportunity to do a lot of things that we probably never would have done live, but it's certainly not the same talking into a screen as it is to have all of you here. So this would be a wonderful opportunity for you to ask questions of Jim.
Yeah, I hate Zoom. Zoom, it's so hard to do those Zoom conferences. It's like trying to do a dog and pony show where there's like nobody you can speak to. It's like, is anybody out there? Am I speaking to myself?
Well, you weren't speaking to me. It wasn't that different.
Well, not with you, but other events. It was literally just me thinking, yeah, I'm at some bookstore. There's no one's interviewing me. It's just me speaking to a screen. It's like, I'm sure they're all laughing at me back there. Like the bookstore is going, look what this stupid person's doing. He thinks people are watching him.
Right.
But anyway, Q&A.
All right. Who has a question? Come on, guys.
Yes, Andrew.
So here's a question for you. With the Starless Crown, there was a movie that also came out recently, which
yes, tell me about it.
Was there any?
It's even worse than that.
Could you
repeat
the question, Jim? So
Andrew was asking me about a movie that came out because the sub you know, it's Starless Crown, first book in the Moonfall saga, and you know, I pitched that to my editor and my agent, and my agent's the one that told me, oh, by the way, Jim, I learned this right from the beginning. He's by the way, Jim, there's a movie coming out. I'm representing the screenwriter called Moonfall. So it's like, great. So, you know, I thought, well, surely, you know, my book will either, you know, be so distant from the movie, or the movie will come out first, or I'll come out first. So I wasn't that worried about it because, again, my book is very different, but it's a fantasy set in, you know, in a weird landscape. But of course, they came out at the same time. The movie came out and my book came out almost the same week of each other. So yes, I wasn't thrilled.
No, but there's no copyright on titles. I mean,
no,
you know,
it
49 people can publish the Starless Crown in the same week, and there's really nothing you can do about it.
And they don't have to have permission from the first author?
No, there is no copyright on a title.
So my next book,
Wow.
the one I just described in Australia, is called The Da Vinci Code.
Part 2. Right.
So, do you pick the titles, or do your editors?
That's a good question.
That's a constant war between all of it.
I think it's very rare that the title I picked for the document I was writing at home ever is the title that you guys see. It's always changed to different things. The only time that actually happened was with my second Sigma book, Black Order. I just didn't know what to call the book, so I just called my document I was working on Black Order. I didn't like the title. It was just bland, Black Order, boring. Gave it to my editor, and I was just waiting for the debate, like, Jim, what title do you want for this book? And then they were like, here's your cover, Black Order. I don't want that title. It's not what I meant. Where's our conversation?
Authors don't get to pick their crowd. I mean, they get some approval, but all of that copyright belongs only to the text for the author. The publisher owns the copyright for the production values for the cover, for the typesetting, all the rest of it. So it's a joint effort. And usually it's the sales department that determines what the title will be and what the cover will look like, working with the art department based upon all kinds of data and whether they're paying attention to the whole universe of books coming out. For example, they might have noticed that there was another Starless Crown appearing 2 weeks later or something. Not the movie, but a book.
Yep.
You know, so the author doesn't really have that much to say.
So for like the book, the Next Sigma book, right now they're pitching the titles to the sales and marketing department.
Right.
The two titles that were sort of narrowed down to that it may not end up being either of them. One is A Petrified Sea, is the first one. Second one is Tides of Fire. So those are the two titles we're working with for that next book. So we will see in a year.
Or there may be a third
whether
one.
It might be an entirely new title. It'll
Yeah.
be, the second Black Order.
And sometimes, like Tides of Fire, they might say it sounds too much like science fiction or fantasy,
Yep.
and this is a different kind of book, and it will be confusing. And so,
Yep.
I've been in on many of those conferences, and you can just rip your hair out. But ultimately, it's them. Miss, you had a question, ma'am. You? Yep.
No, I didn't.
Oh, you were just waving,
I was fixing my hair.
fixing your hair.
Well, even this book was not originally Kingdom of Bones. If you remember, very early, once upon a time, it was The Savage Zone was the original title. It was on Amazon. People would get occasional emails like, "Did I miss a book? Or what happened to Savage Zone? Did he skip over that one and go to Kingdom of Bones?" No, it's just the title got changed. Over the course of 2 years, somebody in the market says, "No, I don't like that title. Let's change it." All right.
So do the salespeople, they all read the book?
No.
Before, so they don't even read the
No.
book to know the title? Or
No.
So they don't even know what the book's
One of
No.
the really
Before they see
dirty
the title.
secrets of publishing and book selling is how few people actually read the book in question. I read all the books for all of our events, which is a really good thing. For example, last May, David Baldacci wanted to interview Jake Tapper of CNN because Jake had a book out. And so they said, make it work. And I said, fine. And so we arrive at the day, and Jake shows up on the Zoom, and there I am, and David can't log in. He's somewhere off in the hinterlands or wherever it is. And suddenly I realized that I am going to be doing the event with Jake Tapper. Well, that would be a complete disaster if I hadn't read the book and been prepared, right? But as it was, we reminisced about all kinds of things, and it was fine. But you can't really run a good events program if you are not prepared to do this.
Yeah.
So how far in advance would you have gotten James' book to read it to where you could discuss everything that was in it?
Well, in the old days, they would have showed up early, but I am fortunate enough to be able to read that book in like an hour or an hour and a half. So there are
You read
days,
that book in an hour and a half?
there are days when I read 3 or 4 books, sometimes more. It's just, other people have perfect
It's supposed to be
pitch.
savored, Barbara.
I know. But, and
Like a fine
listen, come on,
wine.
I remember it. I don't know why. It's just the way
The
my
glass of
mind
wine
works.
we had at dinner, you
My
savored
mother
that
was
more
like
than
that.
my...
It's just,
That's impressive.
no, it's not impressive. Other people have perfect pitch or can draw a perfect circle or whatever, and I'm a speed reader. It's just the whole secret is your eyes don't move. I mean, I've been tested for this lots of times. Most people, when they read, their eyes, move back and forth across. Mine just go right down the middle, just. And I have an eidetic memory, so I can remember where it is. I can't read a digital file at all. But if I'm reading a book, I can remember something that happened like on page 34 while I'm on page 189. It's just, it's just luck. Annoying for you, but, on the other hand,
But then you could read that many authors' books that come. That's a good thing.
it is. Right. Anybody else have a question? This was supposed to be about me. Yes, ma'am.
Sorry. Too many people pointing.
Oh, you
You
point.
pick.
No, it's your event. Sorry.
Over here, because I was looking this direction.
So I'm sure it's hard to answer if you have a favorite book that you ever written. Did you have one that was the most fun to research?
Oh, that's a nice question. I like that.
I'll tell you what Lee Child instructed authors how to answer that question. He said, when somebody asks you, what's your favorite book? You tell them the most expensive one. This book is my favoriteest book of all time. And actually, I'm being a little facetious. It is one of my favorites because, again, a lot of weird animals. Me being a veterinarian, I get to similar to Amazonia. I get to create my own sort of biosphere of weird mutated creatures, and Tucker and Kane, who are two of my favorite characters to write, are featured prominently in this book. They're almost as prominent as Sigma itself in this book. So that was a great deal of fun to write.
So because Tucker and Kane is in it, you get the dog. So that's an extra special treat. When Jim signs it, he draws
my little dog.
He draws the little dog in it. You can't get that unless Tucker and Kane are in the book. Right?
If Tucker and Kane in the book, you get the dog. But otherwise, no.
Wait, there was one back there.
Yes. Growing up, I read a bunch of different authors out there, and that was the struggle I had with writing. Is that I read science fiction, fantasy, thrillers. I was when I was in junior high and high school, I became addicted to rereading the old pulp novels from the 30s and 40s that were being reprinted as Bantam paperbacks back then. So that influenced me a lot. One of the authors I always pitch, back once upon a time, nobody knew who he was, is the author that did The Terror. Everybody seen the television series The Terror? Way at the back there. I'm just drawing back in his name. Dan Simmons, thank you. I don't know why I was stuck with his name. I pitched. He owes me royalty because since the beginning of my career, I've been pitching Dan Simmons. Dan Simmons is a chameleon. Yeah. He writes in almost every genre out there.
Yep.
And the bastard wins every award he writes in. He writes, a fantasy novel. He wins the World Fantasy Award. He writes science fiction. He wins the Hugo Award. He writes a mystery. He wins the Edgar Award. Hate him.
Protean would describe him.
Very much Protean. Yep. So he's one of my favorite authors. I don't know if he's so much influential as that I'm so impressed with his writing. I was trying to encourage people to read him because he's just an impressive writer. I mean, I'm in awe of what he can do. He owes me royalty because I think I helped keep his career going there for a while. He's had a lot of success now with having a lot of his books turned into series. So,
but like many authors, Jim's a voracious reader. But you read a lot of nonfiction as well as fiction,
I do.
Right?
Again, if it's probably poorly kept secret, Michael Crichton, again, a big influence. When I was writing that Telepac, the marsupial creatures that live underneath Antarctica book, Subterranean, I had a copy of Jurassic Park on my bookshelf above my workstation. And because I didn't know how to write a novel. Like I said, I wrote a bunch of short fiction that was buried in my backyard, but when I tackled my first novel, I wasn't quite sure, because I've had no formal training in writing. If you read it in my books, you'll go, he's had no formal training in writing. Because I had to self-teach myself. So when I was going to write my first novel, I thought, well, I'm going to just use Jurassic Park as my template. So I figured that's the best way to get an idea how to pace a novel. So when I was writing my book, well, how many pages was it that you first see a dinosaur? Well, that's when you're going to see one of my creatures. When does the first character die in Jurassic Park? Well, that's when I'm going to kill off somebody in my book. So I just basically used that as a template and figured out how to properly structure a novel. So Michael Crichton was used. Clive Cussler, big advocate of the store here. Clive Cussler, I miss him dearly. He was a great mentor besides being a great writer. He helped a lot of thriller writers out there with blurbs, with support, with the co-authoring projects that he was doing. Tragedy to lose him. Who else? Again, I'm a big military thriller writer, so I read Tom Clancy. I read Dale Brown from, again, my own state of Nevada. He used to live right around the corner from me, so I would knock on his door. No, I did not do that.
You talk about a Jurassic Park, but actually the Michael Crichton book that also I think is important for Jim is the Andromeda Strain. Yep. And he was also one of the first ones who, worried about bringing something back. Remember, because they went to was it the moon? Where was it?
Yeah,
it was the moon.
It was a satellite that came back that was carried the
right, but then worried about contamination and what, and so he's a doctor, and I can't remember the name, but he wrote a book under a pseudonym because being a doctor, he didn't want to be embarrassed if it flopped. And it wasn't it wasn't a Michael Crichton in the sense that we think of it. I think it might have been like more of a hospital book or something. Kind of won the Edgar. So there he was, and then he
Funny. I
adopted.
didn't know that story.
Oh yeah, and so he then became Michael. Went up with his own name and had a great career. But
Yep.
he wrote it kind of hiding, in case it embarrassed him, right? Which you didn't have to do because you've got like animals
I just
that
keep-
were not going to embarrass you if you
Exactly.
flopped.
I just write under pen names anyway, so.
Indeed. Right. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
While you were in college, was it your dream to become a veterinarian, or was it to be a writer?
To be a veterinarian. That was, I didn't think I could have a career as a writer. You do this, and this, and you can, become a veterinarian. There's a very defined track towards doing that. You can do this and this and this and fail horribly as an author. So I went this other way. But, I knew I wanted to be, I've explained this before because I've done this talk, I think, here before about, I knew from third grade I wanted to be a veterinarian. You get that assignment you get some point in elementary school where your teacher says, go home, write an essay what you want to be when you grow up. And I remember it was a point of moral dilemma for the third grade version of myself. I had a blank sheet of paper in front of me, and I knew I wanted to put veterinarian, know how to spell it. So I thought, well, I could just cheat and put policeman or fireman and go out and play. But I did the one thing third graders hate to do, went and got the dictionary and looked it up. That determined from third grade to be a veterinarian. So, that was, my goal. When I got just a little finality to that story, first day of vet school, entering class at the University of Missouri. We're all seated, and the dean walks in, says, you're going to have your first pop quiz. Everybody take out a sheet of paper. It's a one-question quiz. You get it wrong, we're kicking you out of vet school. Write down the word veterinarian. Third grade, I was ready for that. So I was set. But again, I spun tales growing up, and I continued to read a lot growing up, so that's like throwing gasoline on the twisted corner of my mind that likes to spin stories. And my goal when I was first writing was just for the fun of it more. It was just a hobby. I joined a writers critique club and exchanged those short fiction I was just telling you about, and just dabble with it. Maybe one day it would be really cool to walk into a bookstore and see my book on the shelf. That was my goal. Just maybe one boy, get a book out of the bookshelf. And I'm working on my 40th book. So I have got a shelf now. It's a weird path to this.
Patrick, do you have any questions from the audience?
Somebody wanted to know, do you have a title for the next Starless Crown?
It's Cradle of Ice, and that is set.
Oh, that's a great title.
Yeah. So working.
Tell us about it.
If I tell you about it, it's going to ruin the ending of Starless Crown. So I don't want to say. But it's pretty obvious. Cradle of Ice. The people that have read it know they're going somewhere out of the habitable clime between the extreme, and maybe they're going somewhere cold.
And when does that one come out?
It should be out next January. Yes.
Well, first, thanks for sharing your journey. It's actually very, very encouraging. I just started writing last year. I have some short stories published.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
That is hard. Like I said, none of my short stories ever got published. If you're published, you got something.
Thanks. I'm working on my first novel, it's fantasy, and I'm doing under a pen name as well. So my question to you, how did you, or do you deal with, or like, especially in the beginning when you were writing?
Yep.
Did you ever deal with, like the disappointments with support, or like how isolated you have to be to really zone in and write, and like the effects of that? Like, how did you deal with that?
Well, I was, again, I didn't jump right into the novel. Some of you guys writing short fiction, so I was generally working during my lunch hour at the clinic that I was working at, and the clinic that I had was in a bedroom community. So I was very busy in the morning, very busy at night, but the middle part of the day, once I did finish my surgeries for that day, I had a gap of time. So I would just, again, it's my office, I closed the door. I asked them not to disturb me, but that, So I learned while I was writing that, to write in an environment of the phone ringing, receptionists interrupting, dogs barking, cats meowing. So to me, I can't actually write if it's totally quiet. I've got to have something going on in the background, because for some reason it's too quiet. I just, for some reason, I can't get to that point to free up my mind to write. So everybody's got to find their own accommodation. Initially, I wasn't quite sure how to structure a novel. I thought, well, how am I going to finish a novel? It seems impossible. In short fiction, I can fit within the cracks of time of my life. A novel is a big breadth of time. How do I even comprehend doing that? And so, again, self-taught. So I was trying to always, doing stuff online, writing classes online. I was, reading how-to books. And I had heard that if you read a book on screenplay writing, it will give you a good idea how to hone your plotting. Because the screenplay writing is very structured. This has to happen on page 1. This has to be on page 3. This has to be page 10. They're very structured, and they generally follow sort of what the 3-act structure of a story. And so I ordered a screenplay writing book called How to Write a Screenplay in 90 Days. That's good. I want to get my book done quickly. So I got that book. You can find it. It's still out there. And the first page says, to write a screenplay in 90 days, you have to write 3 pages a day. And I close the book and go, well, that makes sense. I never read the rest of the book. Because what I was struggling with was figuring out how to structure that story. It's like you try to think of a novel, it's too intimidating. So all I had to do is think, all I'm going to do is I'm going to write 3 pages a day. And then I kept qualifying it. 3 double-spaced pages a day. That's really a page and a half. And not every day. 5 out of 7 days of the week, I'm going to write 3 double-spaced pages a day. And then I found fit in my life comfortably. And as long as you have sort of a goal, if you have something set, people say, oh, I'm going to write for an hour a day. If that was me, then I'd go, look, I'm researching, or I'm thinking. I had to structure it as there's got to be words on pages. They could be bad words. And one of the notes I have on the side of my monitor is, today I give myself permission to write crap. I didn't use crap. There's another word I use. Same 4 letters, but just different word. Because you have to sort of let yourself go and not think, I've got to write perfect prose. The 3 pages I'm going to write today are going to be the most brilliant, scintillating thing that's ever been created. You just got to get it out on paper. Just get those 3 pages out. And to be honest with you, almost every single line I write is not a line that ends up in a book. My first attempt, whatever I put in the line, oftentimes by the time I go through editing and tweaking it and changing it, it's vanished. But I've got those 3 pages have to be done those 3 out of 5 out of 7 days of the week. And you'll be surprised how quickly it'll accumulate. Also, if you only have to do a page and a half, 3 double-spaced pages, not a whole lot happens. You have a little brief conversation between 2 characters. Somebody will wave to somebody else. That's all you happen in those 3 pages. And then I get a whole day to think about what's going to happen in the next 3 pages. So it makes them in manageable bites. So rather than trying to think of the monstrosity of trying to do a big, hulking novel. So.
And the revision process is much easier if you're writing today electronically than when you were doing it by hand or typing it. Or
I can't read my own handwriting. People ask me, do you I like the tactile sense of writing. Nope, not me. For the longest period of time, I live right near my clinic still, and I get calls from my receptionist saying, Jim, we can't read this record. Can you come in and read this for us? And I'm like, okay, get my car, drive over there, open thing. The dog is sick. There you go. So I have to. I don't think I'd be a writer today if it wasn't for word processing programs.
Thank you.
Sure, no problem.
Did you have another question, Nick?
You just answered it.
Okay.
So I wasn't being rude. I was looking up Michael Crichton's first name. It was Jeffrey Hudson. So if you're interested in finding Michael Crichton's original crime book or whatever, he wrote it as Jeffrey Hudson. I didn't look up the title. But anyway, as I say, it won an award, and then he went on to have an amazing career. Right. Anybody else?
Yes.
Have you had any more word on when you might get something in the movies or a series on TV?
Well, the last time I was here, and I had to be a little hush-hush about it, is that there was a outfit in Hollywood who I still can't name because they get to say it first. They optioned the entire Sigma 4 series. So every single book in Sigma 4 series has been optioned. And what they want to do now is turn each book into a season of a streaming program, whether Netflix or Amazon Prime. So
Yay.
we'll see that happen.
Because initially they said movies, you cannot put one of your books.
No.
No, I'm relieved actually that they're doing a long series format versus a movie, because I don't know how I could not pare one of my novels down into a 2-hour movie.
You lose the meat of the story.
Yeah,
Yeah, long form television is absolutely fabulous for books.
they're doing great stuff in that.
Much
format.
better as a rule than a movie.
Sue, you had a
Why
question?
couldn't they take his books and turn it into the movie series like they did for Harry Potter?
Big.
But even Harry Potter, like I think
Because now they've got the prequel.
Well, true, but movies by nature can't run very long. So you're only going to get maybe 120 minutes for a whole book, whereas if you have long story, you can have 8 episodes. You know, you can stretch out the
even
whole
Harry
story.
Potter, like the first movie was Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. It was the entire first book became one movie. I don't think you could take Map of Bones and make it into our movie without it making a bit of sense.
Wouldn't happen.
So
Yeah. No, I mean, it's been an absolute bonanza for authors, and so many things that I don't think we're ever really going to make it to the movies have been optioned for television. So it's been an absolute golden age for that. And the pandemic, while it had few pluses, one of them was that it did get people to sit home and watch things like that. And the other is it gave us Zoom, which is a technique that, a technology that we didn't have that has been absolutely great. I wouldn't want to do business every day. I'd be sad if I were working in a corporation. I spent my whole day in Zoom meetings. I'd probably shoot myself, but it's been absolutely fabulous for what we do. So we'll see. We probably should thank Jim for coming tonight. Yay.
thank you. Thank you for joining us on Tax Day.
And now we have a special rewards program. So ladies up there in the front, Terry, or what how many numbers did you give out? Sorry, 35? Thank you. So I'm going to give away, remember I mentioned John Sanford, we're going to give away a copy of The Investigator, and I need you to pick a number between 1 and, I know, as I'm putting it on you, kid, a number between 1 and 35, and that person will get to go home with this book.
17. So now I've disappointed
17
everybody.
has to
Thanks,
be here.
Barbara. I'm never buying one of Jim's books again.
No 17? All right, well then you can pick another one.
No one knows 17. 23. There
It's
you go.
you. Wonderful. All right. And I have a special thing tonight because I am told that April Lillard has decided to come tonight to celebrate her birthday. She was looking for something special to do. It's you, is it? And so she decided that she would spend her birthday down here with all of us. Is this your first time at the Poison Pen? Well, how exciting. So I'm extremely fond of a series by Anne Hillerman, who has continued her father, Tony Hillerman's books. And this one has special local significance because it takes place up at Lake Powell and the Rainbow Bridge. And it's really a wonderful book. It's the 5th one in her series, but so we're going to give that to you. Happy birthday. And
Happy
you bet.
birthday.
Here you are.
Thank you.
You are welcome. Would you like to stay here for photographs, or would you rather sit at the little table? I only say that because it's a better height, but you're welcome to choose either.
I think I can stand. I think it might be just fine. I think I can manage to sign without getting too exhausted standing.
So here or there? Here. I just want to know so I can.
Standing.
All right, he's going to stay here. So what we're going to ask you to do is fold up your chairs, lean them against the wall, and then line up by number. Thank you all very much for coming out tonight. We really appreciate it.
All right, I got it.
I have to undo myself.
So how are you?
Yourself undone?